Welcome to the Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Sarah Phillipe. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. It is my pleasure. Happy to talk about this really important topic.
So Sarah has a passion for restoring health that has taken her along a path from an RN to becoming a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, true cellular detox practitioner, and a breast implant illness expert. She believes the solution to reversing breast implant illness is more than just the explant, and that we all need to take personal responsibility for restoring our health by addressing all of the root causes that contribute to chronic illness. It's Sarah's belief that the body has an innate desire to heal if given what it needs, and she focuses on teaching women how to unlock that innate intelligence and heal themselves. That's a beautiful bio. So I can't wait to get into your story. So we'll just cut to the chase. Tell us how you got into this field and share your story with us.
Sure. So, how I got into this field really comes from a place of pain to purpose. And, this is something that I personally went through myself. And, having what I felt like was perfect health prior to getting my breast implants placed. And then subsequently, after getting them placed, my health just continuing to deteriorate more and more and more as time passed on. And really looking and searching for the answers and not knowing, where to look, who to trust, what to do, because there was really no information out there at the time. And so, it's one of those things that you kind of have to just trust your intuition, because there really isn't a lot of research out there. And it's a really big problem these days because, millions of women have breast implants. And there's, I think it was over, the last statistic I saw, I think was around 300,000 women in the US alone each year get breast implants placed for whatever reason. So
Sure.
This has a potential to be a very, very big problem.
Scary. I know I've worked with many clients who we have worked to restore their gut health. We've repleted nutritional deficiencies. We've tried to detox the body outside of having the implants removed. We've tried to optimize hormones, and some patients just weren't getting better. And so I've learned through my patients who have done the research, because they did trust that intuition that something was wrong. And so I had my first patient a few years ago get her breast implants removed, which is called an explant surgery, correct? And she felt better. And I thought, okay, I need to be thinking about this with my other patients who we are hitting a plateau. They're not getting better. We really need to be assessing, and I need to be asking and knowing, how old the implants are, when they were placed, if their health has deteriorated since. I need to be asking these questions as a practitioner. So let's get into what breast implant illness really is and what symptoms patients can have.
Yeah. So, from my perspective, it's really not a matter of if they'll affect you, but when, because they are a significant source of stress on the body, regardless of whether somebody has symptoms currently or not. So breast implant illness is really just a generalized term that we give to a process by which, vague and chronic symptoms develop following breast augmentation with either silicone or saline breast implants. And it can really happen at any point. So either within days of augmentation or even more than a decade later. And it can be characterized by symptoms like chronic fatigue and cognitive dysfunction. So things like brain fog, difficulty concentrating, poor word retrieval, memory loss, muscle aches and pains, joint pain, hair loss, weight gain, weight loss, temperature intolerance, low libido, ringing in the ears, heart palpitations, shortness of breath. There's so many. The list goes on and on and on. I could continue, but you get the point. The point is that these things are so vague, and it's really hard to connect the dots when you have all of these things going on that cross so many different boundaries of what types of diagnoses someone might receive, right? And typically blood work doesn't look too bad. So it's not something that is really obvious when you go in. There's some big, blaring problem.
Sure. As is many times autoimmune disease. Until the autoimmune diseases are significant, many times labs aren't registering that something has gone awry in the body. So I will say what I've seen with many of my patients is brain fog. They just feel like something is not right. They're not as mentally clear, and they can't figure out why. So why are breast implants problematic? What's the problem with them?
Yeah, I would say brain fog I would agree with you. That is one of the biggest symptoms that I see. And that was something that I struggled with as well. It was one of my worst symptoms, actually. And I remember just, mid-sentence forgetting a word that was an everyday word that you probably use 100 times a day, and it just would not come to my brain. And so that can be really challenging for a lot of people because they don't know what's going on. Why is this happening? But breast implants, from my perspective, are a stressor on a couple of different levels. So they're a physical stressor as a foreign object, and they end up stimulating the immune system and eventually tiring the immune system. So that continuous activation eventually results in immune dysregulation, and that can lead to a more muted immune system, and that will eventually allow pathogens to thrive, and overgrowths and opportunistic infections like SIBO and fungal overgrowth and viruses and parasites. And so those things are kind of, in that kind of setting, are allowed to grow unchecked by the immune system, as well as reactivation of, dormant pathogens that maybe you were exposed to at one point and have become dormant and are now reactivated because they can. So things like Epstein-Barr, maybe pathogens that cause chronic Lyme disease. So, I very often will see different types of pathogenic overgrowths on like a stool analysis. So I'll see things like Citrobacter and Klebsiella and Prevotella and Proteus. And I often also see depressed immune system. So low secretory IgA, which is an immunoglobulin in the gut, and that's your first line of defense against pathogens that are entering the body. And so when that's low, you're very vulnerable. So, we don't have a lot of studies about this as far as breast implants contributing to this picture, but when I look under the hood, we often see the damage and we see the changes that are going on with the immune system. So the labs are telling us that the immune system can't fight anymore. And with a depressed immune system, that leads to infections. And then secondly, breast implants are also a chemical stressor because they are full of cytotoxic and neurotoxic and carcinogenic chemicals and heavy metals. And those are highly inflammatory to our cells, our tissues, our organs. And so silicone, the newest version of silicone, the cohesive gel, those are made up of 40 plus different toxic chemicals and heavy metals.
Can you say some examples, give some examples of those to the listener? You speak very well, but to dumb this down, to put it in layman's terms. So what are some examples of heavy metals that are in implants?
So yeah, you have things like aluminum and tin and lead and platinum. And one thing that I found really interesting in my own journey was that I developed an allergic reaction to my ring, my wedding ring, which was platinum. And I always wondered what was going on. Like, why am I reacting to this? Because I've been able to wear it just fine up until that point. And as soon as I got my breast implants out, I stopped reacting to it.
Wow.
And then you have other chemicals like methyl ethyl ketone and cyclohexone and acetone and phenol. And those are all neurotoxins.
Is that regardless? Is that only with this new type of implant, or is that regardless of if the implant is saline or silicone? Or maybe we can get into the differences if one is possibly better than the other also.
Yeah, they each pose different risks, I would say. So this is specific for the cohesive gel silicone implants, which have become very popular since they were released in, I believe it was 2006.
Are those the gummy bear implants, or what are those? Yeah. Okay, that's what I've heard. Okay.
So they were assumed safe because they're very sticky, and when they rupture, they don't, spread in the same way that saline does. And you wouldn't know that you have a rupture either because it stays in place, because it's sticky and cohesive. It doesn't really move.
Okay.
Right? So, and then you have saline implants, which do also have a silicone shell. So silicone is actually called an adjuvant in the development of different types of connective tissue autoimmune diseases. So that means that it is a trigger. So regardless of whether you have silicone or saline breast implants, you are still exposed to silicone. And then beyond that, most people assume that the saline breast implants are safe, or at least safer. And the problem with saline is that they have what's supposed to be a one-way valve that's used to fill the implants when after they're placed with saline solution. However, that valve can either become defective over time, just through aging or maybe an injury to that area, or it can be defective upon implantation. So what happens is that fluid from the body can get inside that implant. And so what happens is that when that's allowed to happen, there's different microbes that can get inside. So you can have fungus, different types of mold, bacteria, things like that. So it really becomes a petri dish for microbes to grow and thrive and create a problem. So that, and from that perspective, we're dealing with biotoxin illness with these people, these women, and that can make someone so sick. I've worked with lots and lots of clients who have that exact issue, and it develops, and it's like you really can't escape it. Think about living in a moldy home. The solution is get out of the home, right?
Right.
And deal with the things that need to be dealt with. But when it's living inside of you, you can't escape it unless you have those implants removed. So it's a huge source of biotoxicity. So we're dealing with different types of toxicity associated with the different types of implants.
Sure. So really, in summary, you're saying the breast implants can suppress the immune system, can lower that secretory IgA. They can make you more susceptible to getting infections. They're essentially a petri dish for growing the infections themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You can then end up with biotoxin illnesses. So what do we do about this?
Okay.
So that can be very scary. Of course, it sounds like they can increase our risk for many infections and biotoxin illnesses, but I know they can also impact our hormones. So talk about that relationship. So how can implants impact our sex hormones?
Yeah, so, stress comes in all kinds of different forms, and breast implants are considered a stressor, in my opinion at least, on the body. Um, just based on what I've described already, the chemical stressor and the physical stressor on the body.
Sure.
And so when you have a chronic source of stress, your body mounts a stress response. And so your brain perceives something as a potential threat. The body releases, certain fight or flight hormones and neurotransmitters like epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol, which trigger the fight or flight response. So once the threat has been eliminated, the body should return to a state of normal function or balance. And so this response is really designed to help us cope with short-term stress, like running away from a bear. That's always the example we give, right? But long-term stress, on the other hand, is continual activation of that process, of that system. And so that can lead to disease in the body. And so, when your body is focused on survival, it is not focused on, replication or reproduction. It's not focused on reproduction. And so your hormones are designed to make you fertile and help you reproduce. And so when you're focused on dealing with that chronic stressor, your body is going to, downregulate hormone production so that it can go ahead and address that stressor.
That makes total sense. So stressors come in all shapes and forms. It could be gluten that you're eating. It could be psychological stress from a bad relationship, whatnot. Could be the stressor of a breast implant that your body is essentially mounting an immune response to and rejecting. Very scary. So you've said that the implants can rob us of hormones. They can essentially reduce our secretory IgA, making us more susceptible to infections. That would even include the current COVID, right?
Right.
Essentially, they can lead to being a petri dish for all sorts of illnesses. So they don't sound like a good thing to me. I like what you said. It's not if, but when they're going to cause problems. So I have to ask the question, do you know many people with breast implants who have had no problems, or are most people you're talking to having problems?
Yeah, what I find is really interesting is that most people can think of problems that they're dealing with if they really sit down and pay attention to what symptoms they're experiencing on a regular basis. And so most people think of a lot of the symptoms they have, like fatigue or difficulty sleeping or menstrual issues, things like that, as just normal. Even digestive issues, like some people really consider those to be normal. Everybody has these issues, or it's a part of aging, right? We hear that all the time. And really, that's not the case. If your body is functioning the way that it should optimally, symptoms don't happen. And so symptoms are typically the last thing to occur when the body is breaking down. So when you start to develop symptoms, that dysfunction has been going on quite a while. So, from what I see, yes, I do see some people who are functioning just fine, able to get through their day and do all the things that they need to do and want to do with no issue. But those people I tend to notice do have some things that they're dealing with. It's just not significant enough yet for them to consider it to be a problem.
So some of my patients then ask, well, how can I try to avoid maybe some predicted problems with implants? Like, can I get them replaced more frequently so that I don't grow mold, whatnot? I don't know the answer to this question. How would you respond to that?
First of all, I think that it is really important to reconsider this decision if you have any history of autoimmunity yourself or in your family, because when you're doing things or incorporating things in your life that dirty your genes, let's say, then you're going to develop the diseases of your genetic weakness. And typically we see that happen with breast implant illness as autoimmunity. So that's something to really pay attention to. If anyone has autoimmunity or a family history of that, I don't suggest implants.
Don't put a foreign object in your body. Yeah.
Yeah, don't put a foreign object in there and trigger that process.
Sure.
And secondly, if this is just something where you just, you're saying to yourself, I'm never going to remove my implants. I'm always going to have this. I don't care, what the price might be. This is something that I need for myself in order to feel good about myself, or whatever the reason may be. Maybe it's because someone has had a mastectomy and feels like that is a connection to, their womanhood and don't want to be without that. And so I completely understand those situations. I would just say, probably the safer option would be saline. I even hesitate to say that.
You're right.
You do have the exposure to silicone. And I would say you probably need to get them replaced really, really regularly, like every 5 years.
Sure.
And that's expensive to plan for,
Sure.
I mean, each surgery is going to cost anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 for a removal and a replacement.
Sure.
And so you're going to have to factor that in.
Now, what if a patient has implants removed? I've had a couple patients tell me this, and they say the implants were removed, they were intact and replaced, so that increases their confidence that nothing was going awry. And does there have to be something visible on that implant? And maybe this is a better question for a surgeon, but does there have to be something visible on that implant to say, yes, this implant was compromising the immune system? I would probably say no.
No, absolutely not. And so what we're discovering as surgeons are performing more and more explants and they're studying the fluid that surrounded the implant in between the implant and the capsule, is that they're discovering 10 plus different types of bacteria that are growing in between the capsule and the implant. So that in of itself is a problem for the immune system.
And that's not visible upon removal, right? It could look
visible.
Sure.
Yeah, your implants can be intact. Silicone or saline can be intact and still be problematic because from day one at body temperature, the cohesive gel implants bleed into the body, and you're putting them in a place where there's so much lymphatic tissue right in that area, so much dense lymphatic tissue. And so that allows for those contaminants to travel throughout the body by way of the lymph very easily. So we know that there have been studies showing that gel bleed, it does happen at body temperature. And, there were so many different studies that were supposed to happen that never did. So we don't really know with certainty how bad these are, so it's really, really risky.
Sure.
I would say.
So there is hope. It sounds like you have recovered. So let's talk through the recovery process. So if a woman is considering having her implants removed, can you speak to a proper explant procedure and where she might go about finding a surgeon who is appropriately trained to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So there is a really specific way that breast implants should be removed. And so that process is called en bloc, which means that the implant and the capsule are removed together as one unit. So the other way that implants are removed sometimes, well, a lot of the time, I would say, are by cutting the capsule open and removing the implant and leaving the capsule in. That's what most surgeons will do. And so you really want to be sure to find someone who does this properly with en bloc and complete capsulectomy, especially if en bloc is not possible. Every speck of that capsule needs to be removed because the capsule also contains a lot of different toxins within its matrix and potentially even harbors bacteria. So that poses another additional risk that's still in your body, and it makes it really challenging to heal. And so I've talked with a lot of women who didn't know this going into it, just wanted their implants out as quickly as possible, went back to their surgeon that put them in, and they were removed by cutting the capsule open, removing the implant, and leaving the capsule behind, and they're still sick. And even doing all of the work that we do after explant, it's still a very challenging process, and if not impossible. So it's R1. R1 of healing is removing the source, right? Removing the source of toxicity, removing the source of infection or stressors or whatever it may be. So that procedure is a very highly skilled technique, and so not every surgeon is comfortable doing it, nor should every surgeon be doing it without a lot of training and practice. So I would definitely look for someone who has done at least 100 explants minimum, because oftentimes they need to cauterize or scrape capsule off the ribs. And in between those ribs is very delicate intercostal tissue that is super close to your lungs. And if something happens, then there's always a risk of puncturing the lung. So choosing someone who's very, very skilled, microsurgeon kind of skill, who's done a lot of these proper explant procedures is really, really important.
Wonderful. So where might a listener find a surgeon trained with this technique? Do you have resources or recommendations for that?
I always recommend going on to breastimplantillness.com. There is a recommended list of surgeons listed by country and state. So there's lots of recommendations there. And they'll also list, if the information is available, whether or not the surgeon performs en bloc and capsulectomy, how much it might cost, whether or not they will do a lift for you, and what that cost might look like. So you kind of get a feel for who is available near you,
sure,
what they're able to offer you, and what the cost might be. But I always recommend, interviewing more than one surgeon to really get a feel for who you connect with, who you feel comfortable with, before making that decision. And they do list, the top, I think, 5 or 6 explant surgeons nationwide, kind of at the top of that page. So, I always feel like it's worth traveling for something this important, choosing the absolute best surgeon for you.
I would agree. So you alluded to the work that has to be done after the source of the toxin is removed, right? The implant is removed. So what should women be doing or focusing on post-explant in order to heal? I assume this is kind of what you help women with. So let's get into that.
Yeah, so the things that I think need to be focused on are toxicity. So not only detoxing the body, but removing other sources of toxicity that are you're chronically being exposed to. So that may look like really doing an overhaul on your personal care products and your cleaning products and the kinds of things that you purchase in the future, like furniture and carpeting and paint and all those different things that also off-gas into your home for who knows how long, months to years, really. And then detoxing the body properly is a really important step. And this is something that a lot of people are talking about. But what's really important to know is that not all detoxes are safe. Not all detoxes are effective. And what's right for you may not be what was right for someone else. So you definitely want to work with a skilled detox, trained practitioner on that process, because true detoxification at the cellular level does require a lot of knowledge and to do it safely. And so what I find is that women are, taking the advice of some random person that they saw talking about it online, and maybe they're using things like chlorella and cilantro, and those things really aren't true binders, and their half-life is very short. And so that ends up posing a problem of auto-intoxication, where you're just really end up driving those toxins deeper into the tissues and into the brain. So that's really important to make sure that you're really working with someone who knows detoxification well. And then addressing infections is another important part of this. And so these things kind of go hand in hand. You know, the infections are there a lot of the time because the body is very toxic and the immune system is downregulated. So working on, you know, supporting and restoring immune function while also going after pathogens if that's needed. Many women that I talk to are dealing with, you know, fungal overgrowth and parasites and SIBO. And that's really, really common. And that's just because of the level of toxicity that you're exposed to. And so bringing the gut back into balance and really bringing down these infections and restoring immune function so that it can do its job better is really important. And so, you know, it's not enough just to go on a parasite cleanse or a candida cleanse, you know, this bug killing spree, because the reason they're there also needs to be addressed. Otherwise, you'll end up with the same problem again.
Sure.
And then dealing with any kind of traumas. So mental, emotional, physical, all of those things can impact your body's function and your ability to heal. So people may feel like they're doing all the right things. You know, they're cleaned up their diet, they're detoxing the right way, they're exercising, they're removing all the different sources of toxicity in their life. Maybe they're meditating, maybe they're praying, maybe they're spending time working on their mindset. But if past traumas are still unresolved, that's a source of emotional toxicity, and that will keep you sick. So those are all very important.
Good points. What about feelings of self-worth and just body image in general, which may have led to getting the implants in the first place? Can you speak a little bit to that and healing or improving that?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to it because it's something that I struggled with myself. And, you know, my desire for breast implants really, it came about from an experience when I was a child, when I was a young girl. And someone very important to me said, you know, you're going to be 4'11" just like me, but don't worry because you'll have the Johnson boobs. And so that experience in my life, I remember it as if it were yesterday. And that's how big of an impression it had on me when I was young, and really kind of developing ideas about the world and myself and who I was. And so that gave me the impression that breasts were important, and not just breasts, but large breasts are important. And they are what define you as a woman. And so when I didn't develop those Johnson boobs, quote unquote, you know, I was concerned. I was worried that I wasn't enough. I felt like I needed to have that to be beautiful, to be desired, to, you know, be good enough. And so that eventually led to me making that decision for myself. It was really all about my body image and my poor, just my lack of self-love for who I was, how I was created. And so that is something that I really have had to work through, and just realizing that, you know, we are so much more than our breasts or our behind, or, you know, whatever it is that we're, you know, worried about or self-conscious about. You are more than that, you know. We are spiritual beings beyond just the physical. I mean, so there's a lot of internal work that I went through personally, and that may look different for each person, but it really just comes back around to loving and accepting yourself for how you were designed, because you were designed perfectly, you know, and everyone is beautiful in their own way. And so I think that there's just a mindset shift that needs to happen. And it's really hard when we're chronically exposed to all these different images on social media of what women are supposed to look like, right? That we're bombarded by that every single day. So going inward and really like just spending some time discovering who you are, not what you look like, but who you are as a person, and finding your value and your worth in that.
That is beautiful. And I wish we had time to really get into that even more deeply today. But that takes a long time for many patients. That's some deep deep work that, like you said, many times is rooted in childhood. So that's not my specialty
Yeah.
or yours. But
Yeah,
I think
right.
that's part of a team that I think patients need to have to help them on their journey.
Absolutely. And it's a process. It doesn't come
Absolutely.
like with the click of it or the snap of a finger.
I love that. So thank you for sharing your story today. Tell us where viewers can find you, where you are on social media, speaking of.
Yeah.
Share that with our audience.
So my website is reversingbreastimplantillness.com. And I can be found on Instagram, same handle, reversingbreastimplantillness.com. And I have a Facebook page as well, and a private Facebook group for women looking for more support, answers to questions they have, and just sharing their story.
Wonderful. And you have a free gift for our listeners.
I
What is that?
do. So I have the Neurotoxic Quiz, and this is a quiz that I use throughout my work with my clients, from the get-go right away. And then each, month as we progress through our work together, we kind of use it to reassess progress. So this really looks at your level of neurotoxicity based on, how you score your symptoms.
Cool. Wonderful. We'll post the link to that in the show notes for the listeners. So Sarah, this was very interesting. And I'm sure many listeners, I hope, will be sharing this with other loved ones, friends, and family members who need to hear this message, because although you and I are familiar with this, I think many individuals are not. They have not, it hasn't even crossed their mind that the implants could be contributing to their chronic symptoms. So my hope is that listeners will be sharing this with those in need. And I thank you for spreading your message about breast implant illness. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.